Well, good day again, everyone. Welcome back to the Conk Economist. And we are continuing our examination of the causes of inflation, the impact that inflation has had on our economy. And today we're going to begin to examine what are some of the things that we can do to maybe cope with inflation. But first, let's review what were some of the key points of our last discussion, where we were looking at the basic causes of inflation. The title of that program was Money Matters Most. If you didn't see that, then you may want to catch up on that. In our previous program, we looked at the period of time basically from 2016 to 2024. And during that period of time, our population increased by almost 5%, specifically 4.78%. And our real gross domestic product expanded by nearly 22%. Now, real gross domestic product is the production of goods and services on an annual basis, in real terms adjusted for inflation. So we are counting actually the number of new cars built or the number of loaves of bread baked or something like this. However, over that same 8-year period of time, we saw that our money supply increased at a whopping 442%. And the national debt, not surprising, grew by nearly 80%. Resulting, unfortunately, in an increase in our cost of living by over 30% during that period of time. Well, there's no doubt about it. Inflation has affected every aspect of our lives and every part of our economy. And with such a bad history, you begin to wonder if we're not almost in the same situation that the jailer was back in the book of Acts, 16th chapter, when he asked Paul and Silas, "What must I do to be saved? What can we do to cope with inflation?" Well, there's no cure-all, but there are some things that we can at least consider and review and examine what has history shown as effective ways of maybe at least keeping up, or in some cases, maybe even staying ahead of inflation. Well, is there any way to stay ahead of inflation? I've examined 3 broad categories of investments that people have used with some success to cope with the problem of inflation. I've prepared a chart, and I've used a 24-year period here for our purposes today, starting with the year 2000 and including the years that were the topic of my previous program on Money Matters Most, the years 2016 to 2024. And going back to the year 2000, at that time, the CPI, as measured in December of that year, was 174, increased up to 315 by the end of the year 2024. 3 broad categories of investments that people have used. The stock market, as represented here by the S&P 500, which has grown from a closing value of 1320 in the year 2000 on December 30 or 31, whenever the last day was, to 5881 at the end of 2024. Gold has been a popular investment and hedge of inflation and a store of value down through the years. Went from a per ounce price in 2000 of $272, if you can believe it, up to over $2,600 at the end of 2024 and well over $3,000 at the time that I'm making this recording. Real estate has also been used for inflation hedging purposes and investment purposes. And I've got data here for the median home price of homes here in the United States as measured in the 4th quarter of the year, which is the most precise data that I could get, going from 172,900 in 2000 to over 416,000 at the end of 2024. Of course, all of these figures today are larger. Gold is now up, as I indicated, in the $3,000 range. The S&P 500 is now in the 6,000 range. So from an investment point of view, what can we say about these broad categories? And we're looking here now at the percentage increases over the period of time. And the CPI over a 24-year period increased by over 84%. This is really quite sad when you think about it. Somebody in the year 2000, if they were in their 40s and planning to maybe retire in their 60s, 20, 25 years later, began an investment program to provide necessary retirement income when they reached their retirement age in the 60s. And look what happened over the remaining part of their work life. what started out to be costing $174 was now going to cost them $315, an increase of over 84%. You can see why inflation makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible, for some people to plan for the future, to save for to save and invest for their retirement or college education for the kids or future medical expenses or whatever. However, the three broad categories of investment that I have identified here, basically the stock market or gold or median home prices over a long period of time, have successfully kept up with inflation. For example, over the 24-year period, the S&P 500 increased by 345%, which compares favorably with the inflation rate of 84. Gold went up a tremendous amount, 862%, a lot of that taking place recently here. For example, between the years 2016 and 2024, gold jumped in just that 8-year period by over 127%. Real estate, of course, is a favorite way to try to cope up with inflation, and over the period of time, 140%. Now, it's interesting to point out that in the 16-year period from 2016 to 2024, when the CPI increased by 30%, real estate kept up just barely by over 33%. So over a very, very long period of time, maybe real estate does better than what would be indicated here. I think I should point out that I have lived long enough to see all of these categories go up as well as down. Yes, you can invest in the stock market, and yes, you can make money there, but I have seen market crashes. I have seen the market fall. Gold prices I have seen fluctuate. Yes, gold prices can go up. In fact, if you look on our chart here, in the year 2020, according to my according to my research, gold closed at $1,895. A year later, it was actually down to $1,828. Of course, today it's now, at the end of 2024, up over 26, and today over 3,000. But even our broad indicators here show that these inflationary, investment approaches can go up and down in value. Median home prices over a period of time go up. I have seen real estate go down in value as well as up. Right now, we have experienced some really sharp increases in real estate over the last few years. Some prices are beginning to moderate. In Florida, for example, it's not hard to go to Zillow and find various real estate prices that have been cut recently by a few $1,000s. But over a period of time here, if you wait long enough, all of these can go up in value. And this is why when you're planning for the future here, it's important to not just think in terms of a short period of time, but a longer period of time. One of the really sad things to look at here is what's happening here to the median price of a home. It's nice to know that they go up in value, but if you were a young couple in the year 2000 and you were wanting to buy your home, and at that time median prices were $172,900, you would need a little over $34,000 for a 20% down payment. However, a few years later, assuming, say in 2005, according to my calculations, a home at that time, assuming an average increase in value over that period of time, would now be up to about 207,000, which means that you would now need $41,000, almost $42,000 for a 20% down payment. Bottom line is this, that when you started out here looking at real estate and beginning to save up for a 20% down payment, you needed $34,500. But by the time, say 5 years later, when you were ready to buy, you thought, because you had saved up your $34,000 or $35,000, now that was no longer sufficient. You now needed $41,000. And so all the way along here, you can see that whatever you were saving up for a 20% down payment, by the time maybe you were actually able to buy, the prices had gone up, and your 20%, as calculated previously, was no longer adequate. And this is a sad situation. It's keeping a lot of young people out of the housing market today. Well, on the one hand, I guess it's comforting to know that there might be some things that can be done to cope with inflation. Of course, it would be best if we didn't have it at all to begin with, and I'm going to be talking more about that in the future. But the three categories that I looked at today obviously are not exhaustive. There might be other ways that one can invest to cope with inflation. For example, in today's world, cryptocurrencies are gaining a lot of attention. My wife has done very well with all of her coins. She enjoys that very much. I pretty much stick to Ethereum and Bitcoin, but she likes all the different coins. And I didn't put any data here because we don't have any really long-term data. Um, Speaking of long-term, the data that I showed indicated that, over, say, a quarter of a century, it may be that some of these can materialize enough and grow enough to cope with inflation. This, of course, assumes that you've got some money to put into the stock market, or you've got money to buy gold, or you've got money to buy a house. If you don't have an opportunity to invest in one of these investment opportunities or in some others, then obviously you're limited into what you can do to cope with inflation. And I'm going to be talking more about housing and affordable housing in the near future. The discussion of long-term investing kind of reminds me of that famous quote by John Maynard Keynes, a very famous economist who, in the 1930s, I think in 1936, he published his book, The General Theory on Employment, Interest, and Money. He remarked that, well, in the long run, we are all dead. So the solution is our goal is to find investment opportunities that will be very much helpful to us while we are alive. And that's it for now. I'll say so long now for Conch Economics, and looking forward to seeing you next time.